The Plymouth Settlement. The Pilgrim's Journey. Imagine sitting below deck on a ship called the Mayflower. There is hardly any light. The air stinks terribly, and it is hard to breathe. The ship pitches, or rises and falls sharply with the waves. Your dinner is dry bread, cold dried meat, and an onion. You have lived like this for 2 months. You are hoping the new land you are heading to is a wonderful place because the trip there was awful. Captain John Smith explored land north of Jamestown along the Atlantic coast. He made a map and titled the region he explored New England. Captain Smith also wrote a book called A Description of New England. Today, this region is made up of 6 states: Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. What are you wondering about this region and what John Smith encountered? Seeking religious freedom. Many people in England read John Smith's book and began to wonder about setting up communities in the region he described. Some people wanted to move there to make money, but others wanted to move there for religious reasons. King James said that everyone in England had to belong to the Church of England. Some people refused to do this. These people were called separatists. They wanted a separate or different church. Another name that is often used to describe this group is pilgrims. A pilgrim is a person who makes a journey for religious reasons. The Virginia Company agreed to pay the pilgrims passage to New England. In return, the pilgrims would repay the company with lumber and furs from their new land. On a cold day in 1620, the Mayflower left on its journey across the Atlantic Ocean to a new world. Early democracy. After nearly 2 months at sea, the passengers landed on the tip of Cape Cod in what is now Massachusetts. Before they left the ship, the Pilgrims drew up a plan of government to help them cooperate or live together peacefully. Most of the men signed the agreement, which is known as the Mayflower Compact. A compact is an agreement. The signers of the compact also elected a governor. This was the earliest form of democracy in North America. A democracy is a type of government that is controlled by the citizens. Each person has an equal say, and people usually elect representatives to make laws for themselves. The Mayflower Compact also included the idea of majority rule. If more than half of the people agreed to a law or decision, everyone had to follow it. What questions do you have about this early form of government and the Mayflower Compact? Settling in. The settlers took several weeks to find a place for their colony. They chose a site on the harbor and called it Plymouth. There was fresh water and good land for farming in this area. In December, 3 months after leaving England, they started building houses. The settlers also built a meeting hall called the Common House. The first winter in Plymouth was extremely difficult. It had been too late to plant crops when the Pilgrims landed. The climate was cold and harsh. Nearly half of the 102 Pilgrims died before spring. There were only about 6 or 7 people who were strong enough to care for the sick. Help from the natives. Plymouth colonists and Samoset. In the spring of 1621, A Native American named Samoset arrived in Plymouth saying, "Welcome, Englishmen." Samoset had learned English from English sailors who fished along the Atlantic coast. Samoset returned several days later with Squanto. Squanto was from a tribe called the Wampanoags, and he also spoke English. Many years earlier, sailors had taken Squanto to England, where he learned English. Squanto stayed with the Pilgrims and taught them how to plant corn, catch fish, and get sweet syrup from maple trees. The Pilgrims were grateful and thought Squanto had been sent from God. Another native who visited the Pilgrims was Massasoit, the chief of the Wampanoag tribe. Squanto helped to arrange a peace treaty between Massasoit and the Pilgrims. They promised not to attack one another. The Wampanoags also promised to protect the colonists from attacks by other tribes. What did you wonder about the encounter between the Pilgrims and the natives? Plymouth grows. The Plymouth colonists began to prosper from their farming and decided to celebrate their harvest in the autumn. They invited Massasoit to come to a feast of Thanksgiving. The Wampanoags brought deer to cook and eat. The Pilgrims had goose, wild turkey, lobster, and cornbread. The Feast of Thanksgiving lasted 3 days. Today, Americans still celebrate Thanksgiving Day. The Plymouth Settlement. The colonists were not only successful at farming, but they prospered from fishing and fur trading as well. As new colonists came, earlier colonists had extra goods ready to trade. The Pilgrims' First Thanksgiving. This painting was made nearly 300 years after the original event. What do you wonder about as you analyze the painting? Trouble starts. After 1630, many more colonists had arrived from England to settle in different areas. Life in Plymouth began to change. Many of the new colonists were not friendly towards the Native Americans and settled on more of their lands. Some colonists did not see a need to cooperate with the Native Americans. Fights broke out between the two groups and trade between them came to an end. Conflict between the Plymouth colonists and the Native Americans. What are you wondering about the way the relationship between the English colonists and the Native Americans changed?